So you mentioned architectural styles, and Arek also mentioned Zaha Hadid's work and Frank Gehry. So do you think BIM has, or just these technologies, computational and parametric design, do you think they've had a big impact on architectural styles, or is it the other way around? Do architectural styles inform these software tools, or have these software tools started to inform our architectural styles? Especially given the fact that BIM has this, like Arik was talking about, the column has to be is this, right? That's how it's defined. It has to be from floor A to floor B. A wall is this. A window is on a wall, and so on.
I think, for example, in case of Gary, like he saw the F planes, and what happened is basically he bought the software that made those planes and made it into a BIM software. So he wanted to kind of get out of his comfort zone on what he can do without computers, and implemented computers to do what he wanted them to do. That's why he has this very distinct style over what he can manage to pull off. I'm not sure in case of Zaha Hadid, because it's highly influenced by Maya, or like polygonal modeling in general. But at the same time, they craft it and they have the sense of aesthetics that's not just about the software, right? So you have the software that helps you do those things, but in the end, everybody has those tools, and not a lot of people are doing what they're doing. So what happens is they have this language over how they use the tool as well. So I think it's definitely unethical to say it's all about the software. Software made those architects. I think it's absolutely not incorrect to say that. Um, Everybody has Rhino. Not a lot of people are making it, right? So in the end, it's the fundamental knowledge that that you have as an architect that helps, I think, when it comes to aesthetics. And no matter if you're sketching or using Maya or Rhino or BIM, understanding aesthetics, understanding um, buildability, feasibility, and economics and things like that is what helps you in the end, right? So, like for example, visualization artists uh, can know 3ds Max, Corona, V-Ray, whatever, and then if you don't know how to compose your scene, or you don't understand fundamentals of lighting, or your scene is not going to be as good as someone who knows that and knows the software halfway. Because in the end, if you want to achieve something, you'll find a way to do it, right? Like for you sketch something and you want to do it, you can be like, okay, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to ask around. And you ask around and see that, okay, I can probably pull this off in Rhino. I think that's the right approach to take. I haven't seen a lot of people who take the software as a shortcut to creativity have succeeded. Those people haven't succeeded so much. Like if you if you regard your um, software as a means that can make you more talented, that doesn't happen. I've been teaching for 6 years. I've never seen any.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's actually a really interesting example. Like Gary and Zaha were famous for, like, Gary for sketching and creating these models out by hand, and Zaha was famous for her paintings and like this very fluid style that she had in her paintings and drawings. And so both of them, you could argue, had like I whenever you talked, like, listen to Gary, it almost like he hates technology. He hates computers, but his firm was like pioneering. So you can, for sure, those two examples, it's almost like computation and the computer was a way to get to translate this thing into built form. And I think Gary was always really interesting, um, whether you liked his buildings or not, that he went out of his way to find the technology to build it. And he went to the aerospace industry and he found CATIA, and that's how he was able to build these buildings probably before the time of the technology. You know, he went out fishing for it, which I think is why, you know, Gary's always really interesting from that perspective. And Zaha as well. I never got the sense of Zaha was like, whenever she talked, I didn't really feel like she was like loves computers or like is behind the computer all the time. But you know, they had to use these tools to create the designs that they wanted to create. So yeah, I don't see at all that, you know, it was the style and their design that warranted them and enabled them to create these buildings. But no, it's definitely in those particular cases, it's not like the tools driving the design. But then I guess more recently, again, going back to like the term parametricism, and, you know, you can see now what architects are using what tools by how their buildings look. So there is a little bit of a mix. Like, you know, you can see that this person's designing in Maya. You can see this is like, it's probably Rhino and Grasshopper script. This is SketchUp, and you know, like you can see it, and you definitely, for sure, you'd see it if it was designed in Revit. Like it would be a pretty obvious thing. So yeah, super interesting question. I think what's more interesting is like, are these tools, they're not driving style, but they're maybe driving efficiency and how successful practice is. You know, big is it a big practice that utilizes a lot of manual labor to get these designs done, or is it like a smaller size practice leveraging technology to get the same amount done? Because you see, like, you know, we've all seen those pictures of old school architecture practice where there's like hundreds of drawing boards and, you know, like staff of like 100 people for just 2 projects or something like that. And now you see, you know, big, where like 200 and so people, you know, doing like a range of projects at any one time. And then, you know, are we going to see this next generation of practices? I think one that springs to mind is Chris Pratchett of, it used to be called Penda, but it's called Pratchett Studio. Precht Studio, there you go. You know, his team is like, I get the sense that he has a team that's smaller. They, you know, maybe he's scripting and using these tools.
But actually, that's the case with all digital technology, right? And it's not just in architecture. Like, for example, right now you can host an virtual event of 1,000 people in VR. And then if you wanted to do it in the physical world, it would have taken like a team of 50 people or something. And then when you do it digitally, or you use digital tools to do it, it usually takes way less people. And that's also the case where a lot of entrepreneurs are coming up. Like, before, you used to look for a job, now you can just be a YouTuber and do your own thing. That's always the case with I guess that's the best thing about digital world, that it kind of takes away the automation, that it takes away the inhumane part of work, and kind of pushes you towards creativity. But there's also this other side, and what Ali was talking about, with the architects, that you see the building and you see that this is made with Revit, right? That's usually the case with, this is a very huge discourse in the international academia called death of the author. So you have this notion that when the algorithm is just being used by the person that didn't author the algorithm, who's the author of the project, right? Like, if I take an algorithm from you, or you give me an algorithm and I use the same algorithm to do another project, who's the author of this project, right? So there's this kind of death of the author where nobody knows the author anymore. And it's this it's this open world where the information is just being is just flowing all around, and it's overflowing in some places. But actually, nobody who does that really goes that big, right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being unnecessarily optimistic here, but people like Za and Gary or Big, like they have the project, and then they, they have the project, and then they look for the means to get to that project, and that's where the ideas end up partially in the final project, right? And usually with architecture, when things get built, you lose a lot of the initial idea, and you can see in this big guys project, they don't lose the idea so much. Actually, they have this idea initially, and they actually stick to it because they find the means to realize that project. And when somebody takes that algorithm and does something else, it doesn't look as genuine. I guess it never does. I don't know. That's how it feels to me.
I think that there's one thing you touched on that really interests me is that like entrepreneur aspect of architects. Like we're typically not famous for being great business people as architects, especially when there's so much passion involved, but I think, and not that BIM or computation and design technology is the pathway to it, but I think it's a huge piece of the puzzle of architects thinking more entrepreneurially, like an archipreneur. And I think it's interesting. We are seeing like more archi podcasts on YouTube and things like that. We're seeing, I think it'd be really interesting to see more startups. Like I see a lot of venture capital firms getting into the architecture world, and this is also a warning to architects, because whilst we're often got our heads in this architecture design world and creating these really interesting bespoke buildings, we have people like Google, Airbnb, WeWork, Katera, who are coming in as like, hey, wait, why is no one solving this housing problem? There's a lot of money in that. and
Exactly.
I think that, there's a lot of, you think about what we do as architects, like we create these amazing solutions to these problems. And if you look at it another way, each one of those is a pitch deck to get some kind of funding to start that idea and start that project. So that's something that's really interesting me, is like right now the ultimate goal of university is to go and work for one of these architects, right? But really the goal, and you didn't see as many. It's difficult to start a practice straight out of university, unless you're, the ones that I've heard that have done it, they've often like spent a good few years between undergraduate and masters. Like, it's not an easy one to just go up and start your own practice from a young age, but it is feasible to start up a startup, or like a small company or something to do with architecture one way or the other, whether you're building or you're part of the industry in some other way. That's what I think is really interesting, and it's not necessarily anything to do with.
Yeah. I guess they help you have an MVP quicker, like a minimum viable product quicker, right? Like you don't have to hire 50 architects to invest in 50 architects to do it. You can hire 10 instead, or instead of 10, you can hire 2, right? And that's another topic actually, where a lot of people look at BIM and like, okay, if everybody does BIM, there will be no jobs. But that's the thing. And that's the case with automation in general. Anything going forward, that's the case, right? But that's when ideas like UIB and UBI comes in, and like universal basic income and everything. But at the same time, a lot of architects need to understand that age of employees are being over, I guess, and more and more entrepreneurial opportunities are popping, and that's where you see IT industries are being more healthy about it and more supportive in this kind of way of working, where they actually want you to become a startup. They don't want you working for them. Or if you want to work for them, you have to be someone independent still. You have to have your own ideas and creative ideas where you add value to the company, instead of being right, like even a draftsman has to be that way right now. It can't be just a simple draftsman who gets tasks and gets it done. It still has to be has to have their own individuality. So I guess more and more, as we give automation to the computers and labor work, we have to work on that creative side and creative problem solving side more.